They're reading out of the book on it. But I denied stupidity, I denied everything. I was just a new guy and I didn't know anything about it. I said I was new and they didn't want to tell me about how the cameras work, so I didn't know anything about them. They just told me to fly with them and pull the trigger and take pictures when they told me to. So that's the story I stuck with. It was while I was at the Briar Patch that they started a campaign to get war crime confessions. And this all started from British nutcase, Bertrand Russell. And he was going to hold a war crime tribunal in Stockholm, Sweden. And the Vietnamese thought it would be very nice if they had a war crime confession from all their air pirate criminals that they held. We were never referred to as prisoners, were Yankee air pirate criminals. Well, they started a campaign in all of the camps going through systematic torture to extract the war crime confession from everyone. And as far as I know, they got one from everybody there. The methods were just absolutely brutal. And then when they did break you, it was just a matter of copying a pre-written form that they had prepared. And they kept telling them, don't change any word, don't lose any words. Well, I didn't lose any words, but I added a few that completely changed the meaning of what they were trying to get. There was one individual who wrote a really extravagant confession. He wrote that once they were pushing with a one-page thing that they prepared, but Nels, he sat down and wrote a big, long 6-page confession. He was a Navy pilot off the carrier, and he wrote about who was on the carrier and so on. But the only problem was he used all comic strip characters with who his shipmates were and the pilots and who his commander was. Ben Casey and Dick Tracy and all those guys were all his dead. And he went on and really took it to them. Well, they were so proud of that is the statement they took to Stockholm for this war crime tribunal. I talked to a reporter that was present at that opening, and that was the first thing they read. And he said the whole place broke out in a roar of laughter, and because it embarrassed the Vietnamese delegation tremendously. They came back to Hanoi and came down on the camp people, and the camp people came down on Nels. He spent the next 22 months with his hands handcuffed behind his back and his legs in irons. They had a horseshoe-shaped rod that went around your ankles with another rod through and padlocked in place. And Nels spent 22 months, but he said it was absolutely worth it. Every minute of it, he would do it again if he had had the opportunity. 1967, I moved back into Hanoi and back into the camp that was called the Zoo. I was living next to the gentleman that was the senior officer in the camp at the time. That's when he informed me that what the definition of a new guy and an old guy was. We had the old guys that had been there for quite a while. I said, anybody that's been here a day longer than you have is an old guy. Anybody that comes in a day after you is a new guy. We had a better term for it, but I won't use that here today. But, we spent a lot of time tapping on the wall during the siesta with past information. And if you got outside to do any work, which didn't happen very often, but they had some bamboo brooms, they'd take someone out once in a while to sweep the dirt path. And they would sweep in cold. If they took somebody out to work in one of the gardens, which they did occasionally, they'd give you a great big grub hole, and then you would dig in cold. And there at the Briar Patch, the two guys in the cell next to me were going out and splitting wood for the cook in the cook shack. And they gave them a big machete and a big block of wood to pound on that machete to split the fire with. They talked to the whole camp, and they were doing lots of work so they could send a lot of information to everybody in the whole camp. Because every swap with that stick was in code. We would go to the bath area, and the first year, the bath, you would vary from sometimes once a week to sometimes once in 6 weeks in the bath area. But when you did, we would usually wash ourselves, wash our clothes, and then you would shake the clothes out, give them a good snapping. And the way we always did that in code, we'd usually give our initials and then the cell number of what building and what cell we came from. That way everybody in camp knew that you weren't under the gun, that you were out moving around. It was tough communicating from one area to the other because the cells blocks with each one fairly isolated. But we got back in the zoo, and now I've been there a little over 13 months, and I finally got a cellmate one day. But the guy I knew before, he was shot down about a week before me. And we sat down and we talked and we talked and we talked. The guards come along and made us go to bed. The next morning we get up and talk to our throats were sore, trying to catch up with what's been going on. But when you talk to somebody all day and there's nobody else around, you know, after 1 year of talking to that same guy in that same cell, where you're probably separated for 1 hour a week, you get kind of run out of things to talk about. And after 2 years, you really run out of things to talk about. But we spent 2.5 years together in the same cell. There was a fellow from Minneapolis was in the adjoining cell, and he had the same situation. His cellmate and he had been together in that same cell for 2.5 years. That was my wall to tap on, so Dick and I became very good friends. I'd never seen him, but we tapped on that wall every day and knew everything about his family. And we would pass menus of what we wanted for dinner and whatever you can think of. But mainly we wanted to get information of who was going for interrogation, what the subject of the interrogations were, and so on. We established a note drop, and by people getting out with the broom to sweep and stuff, let the next cell block over know that in the shower area there was a hole in the bricks, and we would stick a note in there. I ended up as the note writer for our cell block, and I would write the notes on our toilet paper. The toilet paper was like a very rough brown paper towel material, only just half the process. It was really rough there. But I'd tear off a piece of that, and you would get a chip of brick or a chip of coal, and use that as a writing utensil. And you know, if you think the kids now use a lot of abbreviations with this texting, they had nothing on us. We had abbreviations that you wouldn't believe it. But in fact, we named all the guards and the interrogators and stuff, and we usually named them with names, 2 names, so that you could send the initials. You know, we didn't have to spell out the whole name and they knew who you're talking about. One was the one guard we had, Lenny Lipschitz. And to show you how the name come about, some guys moved from another camp. They came to our camp, and they said, well, this guy had been at their camp before they moved over there. At their camp, they called him Denny Dipshit. So, you know, the same name kind of followed the same guy. But we set up a note drop, and I would write the notes to get to the next cell block. And then the next cell block, they found out when they were standing up, there were little vents up next to the ceiling. They could see out across the camp. And they started waving in front of that little vent. It was right up next to the ceiling, probably a 4x8 vent. And somebody clear across the camp coughed. So then they started code, and they were getting coughs from across the camp. Well, it wasn't long then we had a communication link clear across across the camp by waving through the tent. So now we could get information going completely around the area. I was really blessed one day when the fellow in the cell next to me went to interrogation, and while the interrogator was out of the room, he stole a pencil out of his briefcase and brought it back. Well, when you're in a small cell where you don't have anything, it's kind of hard to hide a pencil. So he took and broke all of the wood off and just saved the pencil lead. Broke it into pieces about an inch long. He left one of those in the shower for me so I could use that to write in the notes. Now I can put 5 times as much stuff on one note as I could before. And to hide the pencil lead was no big problem, because we had hundreds of these geckos that lived in our cells and ran over the ceiling, and their droppings were about the same size as a pencil lead. So I could just lay that on the floor and it was never discovered. And hiding the note until it was time to go to bat, because you never knew when you were going to go, was a problem. And I won't go into details on where I hid the notes while I was waiting to go to bat. There were lots of changes in treatment, and the changes in treatment would ebb and flow with the war and the world situation. In early 1967, they thought we were going to be going home soon. And they started referring to us as prisoners and wanted to know if we were going to say good things about them when we got home. And after about 2 months, it was obvious nothing was going to happen. And so they come on the camp radio, and the camp commander put us back into the criminal status. We were threatened continually with being put in a trial for war crime trials. And this would go on. Well, then there'd be a time when things would get a little better. When they stopped the bombing in North Vietnam in 1968, they thought we were going to go home then. So the bombing halt took place. Again, that never happened. So our treatment had gotten really good, and then it went way downhill again. Started getting a little better. And then in 1969, we had 2 guys that went over the wall. They had a really good plan for getting out of the camp, but they didn't have a very good plan for getting out of the country. Their plan was to try to get to the Red River and go down the river, but they never made it that far. They were captured, returned. One of them we never saw again after he was returned to the camp, and was seen taken into an interrogation room. He was never seen again. The other one was treated brutally, and our treatment for everybody went really downhill. It stayed that way for quite some time. Well, after Ho Chi Minh died in the fall of 1969. Within weeks after Ho Chi Minh's death, there was a marked change in our treatment. They started taking the bricks out of the windows that had been bricked up. They started opening up the shutters and letting in sunlight. I ended up in a cell with 4 people in it. They started letting us out for a little bit better exercise every day. And it was just a marked improvement. And we started getting more to eat. The food quality wasn't any better, but we were getting a little more of it. We went one period where we went to 7 months. 2 meals a day, 7 months, and never missed a meal of rice and cabbage. No, yeah. So if your wife is preparing your food, you're bored with it, just think it can be worse. 7 months is the same thing to eat. Not like getting leftovers once or twice. Letters home were something that some of the very early shoot-downs got to write letters home. early on. And some of the others that had some notoriety, like Colonel Reisner, and there were several in there that if they had some notoriety prior to being shot down, they were allowed to write letters home so that they could use them for propaganda tools. There's one friend of mine who had been shot down the year before me. He was the number 4th POW in North Vietnam. He was one of the guys that got to write letters. His wife had a baby about 2 months after he was shot down. And so when I got there, I was able to get the information to him about the new baby and what his name was and so on. But when he got to write his next letter home, he said in the letter that he thought Stephen, which was the baby's name, he said, I think Stephen is a dandy name. Spelled capital D-A-N, capital D-Y. Well, his wife Ruth knew that the only way he could have found out what the name of the baby was from me. And so she called my wife right away. This was about a year after I was captured, so that was the first my wife really knew that I was still kicking. It was about 2 years later, or 2 years from the time I was captured, before the official first list came out of who was captain in North Vietnam, and my name was on that. We did have people there who were never on any list that were there. However, Rutledge was never listed as a prisoner. His family didn't know he was there until the day we came home in February 12, 1973. And then there were people that were on the list that were not there. And that was really tough. They were on the list. We knew they had died in captivity, but the enemies kept them on the list until the very end. My first letters home started in late 1969, early 1970.